Okay, well, welcome to week 2 of February financial literacy series with deaf businesses and the community in general. I'm Jazzy Jones, your host for this month. I'm glad to see many of you in this room with us today. Also, before we start, I just want to take a minute to Wawa Snap. I just want to give some kudos to Wawa Snap because he had an amazing performance Super Bowl Sunday. His video went viral, and I just really love the fact that he represented ASL so beautifully and for us, for the deaf community. Next slide, please. And before we get into this program, this event, I just want to talk a little bit about Zoom and accessibility features. Many of you are familiar with these features, but I just want to give you a little heads up. This event is actually best watched through your desktop. On your mobile devices, you might face some challenges. And also, we do have interpreters who are voicing this event. You also have the option of clicking on closed captions, and you can view the event that way as well. We have an amazing tech support crew available, ready to help you if you're struggling with Zoom accessibility, visibility features. If you have any questions relating to tech, please use the chat box. And you can look from a response from CSD Learn's tech support. Next slide. And again, we will be having a PowerPoint presentation during this event. For maximum visibility, you can use the line. It separates the option, your viewing option. You can resize your screen depending on how big you want to see the PowerPoint. And only use the chat box if you're chatting with other attendees. If you have any tech questions, you can use the chat box. If you have any questions for the presenters, you can use the Q&A feature. You can also use the Q&A feature if you see any questions that someone else has already asked and you want to piggyback on and give a heads up. You can do you can click the link and vote on that question, and it will prioritize that question to the top. We also want to thank our wonderful sponsor. This event would not be possible without the financial support from Wells Fargo Foundation. CSD Learns has been hosting this financial education literacy event for a while, and we owe a lot of gratitude to the Wells Fargo Foundation for that. Next slide. Okay. Before we get into this program, I just want to recap a couple points that I mentioned last week. Some of you might not have been able to see last week's event, and you want to share some highlights. Next slide. Oh, can we actually back up a little bit? Okay, perfect. So here's what we discussed last week. So as of 2019, African American community economic spending power was $1.2 trillion. That is a big amount of money that the Black community contributes to the economy. And by 2024, that number actually increased to $1.4 trillion. 37% of Black consumers are more likely to buy from a business that shares a common social stance, the same points of view. So if they share the same political stance, then the individual is more likely to support that brand or that company. During the pandemic, when it started last year in March, we're almost coming up on a year now. Wow. But since the pandemic started, Black-owned businesses declined by 41% between the months of April and May. Just a short amount of time, it declined by 41%. Black-owned businesses declined for a multitude of reasons. They might not have had money to continue the business. They were forced to shut down, and many Black-owned businesses, they actually got infected with COVID as well. Black and Brown community COVID hit the Black and Brown community the hardest. And so many of those Black-owned business owners were not able to survive and didn't have anybody to take over the business. So that 41% decline within that short amount of time. One last thing. There's just a small percentage of Black-owned businesses that were able to take advantage of resources like the PPP loan, the Paycheck Protection Program. That loan was provided by the federal government to actually support businesses during the pandemic and while the shutdowns persisted. During the summer, many restaurants and businesses had to shut down for isolation purposes. Those businesses that wanted to continue to cover the costs for employees, utilities, overhead costs, so they ended up using that PPP loan. A lot of Black-owned businesses, unfortunately, were not able to take advantage of that resource. And sometimes those loans, the Black-owned businesses were not able to take advantage of those resources due to banking issues. And they also didn't have the relationship with the banks to continue to be approved. And I want to emphasize what was important for me is to spotlight and highlight these Black-owned businesses. It was hard to find them. So if you don't know of any Black-owned businesses or are not familiar of any of the businesses that I have mentioned, or you want me to mention a business, please share that information within the chat box. And I would very much appreciate that. Next slide. The first individual, at Miracle by the Sea. This individual is based in Florida State, or this business, excuse me, in Sea Marshall. If you want to continue a healthy lifestyle, this at Miracle by the Sea is a wonderful mineral that you can purchase to continue on a healthy lifestyle. And at Lotus Blossom Co. has an Etsy shop where you can purchase tumblers, jewelry, many different artistic items. The last one, at _ Queen Sherry. She is a hairstylist. She braids hair. She's based in New York. And she actually does travel to different cities and states to meet with her clients. She is a wonderful hairstylist. Next slide. In addition, Black-owned businesses have had many directories that spotlight other Black-owned businesses. Now, you're already familiar with Black Deaf Center, DAC, and that one only focuses on Black deaf-owned businesses that are nonprofit and have resources. So please definitely check them out and follow that account, and you can build up your membership. And again, if you know of any Black deaf-owned businesses, please also ask the business to share their resources or their contact information to the BDC page. And the third one is also Black-owned. The other three, excuse me, are Black-owned businesses that are hearing. And you can share those resources as well. One of those businesses is at Black-owned Everything. And that account actually focuses specifically on Black women businesses. That account is money from a Black woman. The third one is, again, a directory. This directory is massive. It has tons of numbers and contact information for many Black owned resources and businesses. It's called We Buy Black. Next slide. So now, my introduction. I invited my friend Richie Bryant to come today and talk about financial literacy. This is a very important topic in the Black community. Richie Bryant will explain why, but I also want to share a couple of thoughts on that topic. Number one, for the Black community, many Black families often consider money a taboo subject. So during supper time conversations, that was not talked about. That kind of was perceived as, don't talk about that. That's not your business. Many Black children grew up with did not grow up with the literacy or the knowledge to manage their finances. They didn't have any literacy or knowledge or education on stocks, investments, only what they've picked up from their past experiences. Another thing, that was considered a taboo in the Black community. So I did ask Richie Bryant to come and speak on this subject and explain why it's so important for the Black community to understand. We also want to empower and uplift the Black community with this knowledge. Unfortunately, Richie Bryant was not able to join us live today. He had other obligations, but he did understand the value of this topic and this content. So he did make a recording explaining a bit about the topic. I will turn it over to the recording now. So if you could please watch this video. If you have any questions for Richie Bryant during this presentation, again, please use the Q&A box feature, and we can pass those questions on to Richie Bryant, and he will respond through video with a video message. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome Richie.
Hello. First off, I want to give a huge thank you to CSD Learns for inviting me to give this presentation. There's some vital information for you that I'm going to share today. So I'll start off by giving a brief introduction of who I am. My name is Richie Bryant, same name sign is RB on the chin, and I'm a certified deaf interpreter, and I've been working as a CDI for over 10 years now. I also teach ASL. And I've been an instructor at various colleges and universities, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. And during that time, I've gone around providing workshops and trainings on various different topics, whether that be ASL, interpreting, finance, or even business. I also founded my own company. We just recently celebrated 1 year, and that company's name is FCBU, which stands for Community by Us. And since its inception, our goal has been to provide trainings and workshops about ASL, deaf studies, and interpreting, but always under the framework and centering the BIPOC community. Now I have Instagram, Twitter, and email, and of course you can contact me anytime with any questions. All right, let's get going to the presentation. So today's topic is rebuilding the financial literacy in preparation for post-COVID-19 recovery. And it's under the workshop series, Rise Up, Black Deaf Businesses Surviving the Pandemic. So as I mentioned, this is under a workshop series. Last week, Jazzy Jones hosted a workshop entitled The Power of Black Money. This week, I'm giving my presentation on financial literacy. And then the following 2 weeks will be panel discussions. Okay, so the objectives for today's workshops, or for today's workshop, is the following. First, we will recognize the impact of financial anxieties caused by COVID-19. Second, we'll recognize the importance of building a robust foundation centered around financial literacy. Third, we'll discuss financial insecurities and how we overcome those through uncomfortable conversations. And we'll wrap up by listing possible opportunities to produce additional income streams. So those are the 4 things we're going to discuss today. All right, now that I've got you good and excited, let's get going. So as you are all aware, it has been a year since COVID-19 first impacted us. And it wasn't just America. COVID-19 has had a global impact. So we can look at the charts here. We'll start with the one on the left. And you can see the many different industries that were impacted by COVID-19. Now, the industry that experienced the highest impact was the hospitality and leisure industries. So that includes things like airline travel, hotels, restaurants, different things related to that experienced a huge impact due to COVID-19. And then you'll see other businesses, such as stores. Now, of course, grocery stores weren't impacted, but clothing retailers and things like that. Education was impacted, and all these other services really experienced the financial crisis of COVID-19, and that directly impacted folks' individual income. Now, those impacts were due to maybe layoffs, or maybe a job that started off as a 40-hour-a-week full-time job was reduced to part-time. And some businesses couldn't continue to operate and they had to close their doors. And even we even had to work on doing payment reductions as well. So all of these areas were impacted by the crisis. And that caused folks to experience financial insecurities. So as I mentioned, it's been 1 year of us struggling and really trying to be resilient. And for the longest time, it felt like there was no end in sight, but finally, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It felt like the worst was yet to come, but it looks like we're finally going to experience that upswing. And there's two main factors. One is the vaccine has started the rollout process, and it's hitting places all over the country and the world. And there's 3 or 4 different companies that are leading this surge. 2 are based here in the US, and the others are abroad. And they've been able to make successful vaccines with a high rate of immunity. So that means that that reduces the chances of someone contracting COVID-19. So once we're able to achieve that immunity throughout America, that'll help stabilize our income and then it'll begin to rebuild. We've also seen hospitals be overwhelmed with high rates of hospitalization. That'll also reduce as well. Now, there's the 3 main groups that we're targeting for these vaccines. Of course, healthcare workers, and then we have senior citizens and older folks, and people that fall into the high risk category. And lastly, which is a very important group, are those who work in the education field, whether that be K-12 or colleges and universities. So you may be wondering why the third group? Well, the thing is that they are the key to pulling us back into financial recovery. The reason why is that when the schools were closed, children were stuck at home with their parents, and parents had to split their attention between work and caring for their children. So that meant that many parents didn't feel comfortable going back to work or working as many hours. But once the vaccine rolls out, that means that children will be able to go back to school. And that means that parents will feel comfortable going back to work. And that alone will have a huge impact on our economy. So those are the 2 optimistic points that we're currently seeing. Now, of course, we also have the stimulus package coming. It's been drudging through Congress, and the goal is to have a $1.9 trillion package. And that'll help with infrastructure, the vaccines, but it also has money designated for small businesses. And that money can be used to help hire folks and get them back to work. So both of these possibilities are a huge high point that we can look forward to in the future. All right, so now let's get to the core of my presentation, which is financial literacy. And you may be wondering, why is financial literacy even important? But before we can answer that question, we have to define financial literacy, which is possessing the knowledge and skills where you can best determine a financial plan. And you gain those skills through education and obtaining resources. And all of that helps you develop a better picture and make better decision making related to your financial health. So that's financial literacy in a nutshell. So now you may be wondering why that's so important. And so when you have financial literacy, that means you have access to a variety of different resources and you realize that your options aren't limited. You have a plethora of options to choose from, and that helps you make the best decisions possible. You can make decisions based on your own personal and financial needs. And also, when it comes to your finances, it can be really hard when you're in the thick of it. It's best to pull out of it, and financial literacy allows you to get a big snapshot of how everything plays into effect in your overall financial picture. And that helps you to find the right resources to match your overall vision. So again, it's important to zoom out and be able to take a look at the big picture. And that's how you're best going to develop your financial plan. By taking those resources, by losing the big picture, and doing all of that to incorporate a good design to have a robust future for your financial outlook. So now we can discuss incidental learning. So that's the phenomenon when people just overhear conversations. Or maybe they oversee a conversation that someone else is having. And it's all comes straight from the environment. It's not an overt task. It happens very passively. And it's most important for children to experience that. As they're growing up, they hear adults talking about financial issues. And so later, as they grow up, they already have the knowledge to possess because they can look back and say, oh, I remember when my parents mentioned this, and they know how to apply it to their own future. Now, this presents a huge problem for deaf children. It's important to remember that 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. So that means they don't get communication access till much later. So when we think about something such as the dinner table syndrome, which discusses the point that oftentimes at the dinner table, families are discussing different topics, but deaf children aren't privy to those conversations due to lack of communication access. And that has a direct impact on their financial literacy. So that's called DTS, or dinner table syndrome. And so as a result, we've noticed that deaf folks seem to think that discussing finances in general is taboo. And we have to figure out how to break down that mentality and have open conversations. Because it's important that when we discuss our financial struggles, someone else may be able to relate. Or maybe someone's already had that experience and they have resources that you can benefit from, or vice versa. So it's important to have that transparency and have those discussions with finances. Because as we share information, we can learn from one another's hindsight. And so that just underscores another reason why it's important for deaf children to have communication access from a young age. All right, so now let's get to the topic of financial literacy. So when people don't have the information or knowledge required, it causes that insecurity. So something such as COVID-19 or any other situation that may cause some type of turmoil results in financial literacy. Folks become nervous and they're not sure how to handle the situation. So there's an author named Dr. Spencer Johnson, and he wrote a book entitled Who Moved My Cheese? And I have to say, this is an amazing book, and it really is an easy read. And you can buy this book online, or you can download the ebook and read it. But it's a great allegory. And it was written back in 1998. And the story centers four protagonists, him and Ha, and they're, quote, little people, as they're called in the book. And then Sniff and Scurry, they're two mice. So I'll give you a quick synopsis of the book. So these mice are in a maze, And it's always and the cheese is always found in the same area. So every day they go through the maze, get the cheese, and leave. But one day when they go to the center, the cheese is missing. And they think, oh, maybe someone forgot it. It'll be here tomorrow. So they leave. But the next day, the cheese isn't there again. So Sniff and Scurry start to think. They smell around and they think, you know where there may be cheese in another place. So they go off to find it. Now him and Ha, they look around and they don't see the cheese and they say, you know what, it'll be here tomorrow. And they leave. And they repeat this process again and again. And every time the cheese is not there. And then finally, him gets a little brave and decides to venture off and see if they can find the cheese. But Ha says, no, I'm going to stay. And him finds the cheese and tells Ha, but Ha still wants to stay where they are. And so the point of that story is that our lives experience change every day. It's impossible for things to stay stagnant. I remember I'm looking back at technology. When I was a child, my mother worked for Texas Instruments. And at the time, they had these big keyboards and that connected to the computer. And I thought that was so amazing. And now, computers have innovated to the point where they can do all the things and more. Car design has changed quickly. Soon we're going to be going completely electric. And technology is really booming. You know, back in the day, we used TTY, and now we've got video phones in our hands. And so change is always happening. And the point is that we must be prepared to change. We always have to be ready. The only constant in itself is change. And so we have to start to predict change, that change is going to occur, and be ready to go with the flow. We can't wait. We have to be proactive. We can't be like him and Ha, just waiting for the cheese to magically show up. We have to go ahead and be proactive because the cheese is always moving. And as we get used to that process, we can begin to enjoy the process of change. And we get used to the cycle. And we realize that the change is going to happen and we're able to go with the flow. And so that allegory applies to our daily life, that we must be flexible and we must prepare for that flexibility. We can't get stuck in our ways and get attached to the status quo. We need to let go. And that is the point, is that we have to learn how to let go of our financial insecurities and be ready to change. And so we have to be ready to change quickly and adapt. So one of the reasons that folks really fear change is that they're very risk adverse. But I'm here to tell you that the problem with that is that change risk is everywhere. Maybe you want to buy a new computer, but you're not sure which one. There's risk in that. Or maybe at home you want to paint a new color, but there's risk involved in that. Or even before you bought your house, there was risk involved in trying to pick the right area. We experience risk when we go to college, trying to choose the right one. And then once we found the right college, there's risk in trying to choose the right major. So every decision we have has risk inherent in it. But the point is that we have to do a shift in the way we're thinking. We have to move from being risk adverse to risk tolerant. And we have to figure out a baseline for what we accept within our risk tolerance. So it's important to know how you're going to manage your risk. And the best way to do that is to develop a risk continuum that ranges from low risk to high risk. So when you make decisions, you have to go back to that framework and figure out where it falls on the continuum. And then once you've identified your risk tolerance, you can move forward. So again, it's important to not just respond directly to the risk, but develop a continuum of risk tolerance. And that's an important shift that we must make. So part of the reason that folks are risk adverse or experience financial insecurity is that lack of incidental or environmental learning. So when you're not privy to those discussions and conversations, that means that your understanding of financial risk is limited. And as a result, your understanding of financial literacy is limited as well. And when you don't have that education, your finances are limited, or your options feel limited, and then you're resistant to change and resistant to the risk because you don't know how to handle those situations. And you can never really be proactive when it comes to your financial future. And again, it's really important to dismantle this idea that talking about finances is taboo. We need to have these open discussions because we're becoming role models for our children. And when we're transparent about our finances, the younger generation sees that. But it's also important that we're transparent not only about our successes, but our failures, so that they know that if they make a wrong decision, how it will impact them, but also how they can recover from those decisions as well. And it's really important to remember that we're all in this together. So we need to share our war stories, both our successes and our failures, to help build a robust financial literacy within the Black deaf community. So believe it or not, the best time to build your financial foundation is during an economic downturn. And I know that may seem counterintuitive, but it's true. The reason why is during that downturn, you have the opportunity to review your spending habits and see where you may need to make cuts or where there's waste. And you can really get to the meat and potatoes of what your budget needs to be. And that's how you build a strong foundation. You can also start to figure out how to get alternative revenue streams and apply those as well. So, one company that's a great example of this is Apple. Back in the 90s, Apple was really struggling financially. Steve Jobs came back to the company and became the CEO. And during this time, Apple was suffering. And Steve Jobs was trying to figure out ways to innovate, so he invested all the money into R&D, which stands for research and development, and that allowed them to innovate and release the new iMac. And I'm sure you remember it. It was the blue one with the transparent background. And that was a huge success. And we saw Apple's numbers boom. And that's why you always have to be ready and prepared because you never know what's around the corner. Right now, the government is starting to push that vaccine and they're starting to roll out a stimulus package. And so businesses need to be ready right now to capitalize on that so that they can ride the wave back up. So the point is right now is the best time to start taking a look at your financial situation. You can see where you need to make reductions, where you need to make changes, and how you can best pay off debt. One option is to pay off the high interest rates first, or you can use the snowball effect. You know how a snowball rolls downhill? It's a very similar process here. So you start with so you have four In the example here, we have 4 different credit cards. One has a very high interest rate and it goes all the way down to the lowest interest rate. So you start with the lowest interest rate and you play that one off first. That allows you to double the amount you're paying to the second lowest and then the third lowest and so on. And by the end, you're able to pay off all 4. So now let's talk about cash flow and how we can increase it. So of course, there's a traditional option of getting a second job and you can use that money to pay off debt. Or maybe you have some property that's not being used that you can rent. Maybe you can put it off on Airbnb. Maybe you have an extra room that can provide you some income. Maybe you have a basement that you're not using and you can renovate that space and get a steady rental income from that. Or maybe you can set up a studio and rent it that way. And so there's different ways that you can have income property. The third is you can start your own business. Maybe you have a product that you can sell, or maybe you can offer part-time interpreting services. The possibilities are endless for starting your own business. And so now we can discuss how we can diversify our assets. So there's 2 options. You can have residual or passive income. A great example of passive income is if you write a book and publish it and you just get the royalties from that. So passive income is kind of a set it and forget it. Once you've made the product, you can just sit back and get all the funds. It doesn't require you to continually work on the item. And then we have stock and bonds and various investments where you put the money in upfront and then years down the line, you're able to cash out and get the money that way. And then we have investment properties such as houses or apartments, and the list really goes on. But the point is that there's tons of opportunity to build your cash flow during the economic downturn so you can again ride the wave back up. Okay, so in closing, yes, financial insecurity is a reality, but it's important that we begin to shift our mindsets. And we have to build that robust financial health. And I recognize that that process is hard, but it truly is the first step to achieving financial literacy. The second is to learn about finances and educate yourself. There are so many good resources available online where you can learn. There's also some subscription services that you can use that will give you financial advice and services and tips. And you can take a look at those and see what fits your needs, but also it's important to go back to that idea of risk tolerance and where your threshold is upon the continuum when thinking about these services. And then, of course, we have to create that comfortable space for discussing these topics that we once felt were so taboo. Because we learn so much from each other. And that's how we're going to get the ability to see the full plethora of options we have available to building a strong financial foundation and strong financial health. All right, so this ends my discussion. And now, typically we would close with a Q&A. But unfortunately, I'm not able to answer your questions right now. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and CSD will compile the list and give them to me, and I will answer them and send them out to you. And I'll try and get those answers to you as soon as possible. And again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this information with you on financial literacy today.
Got to make sure I have this lotion on. So some closing thoughts. I've already seen the information that Richie Bryant has shared, and I want to thank you to, I want to thank you to, to Nakia Smith. 2,000 jobs during this pandemic. She has actually been taken. 82,000 jobs, excuse me, in December is when Black women had lost their jobs, excuse me, that number. And they've experienced those financial downturns during 2020. We need to diversify our income. We can do that by multiple jobs from multiple streams of income. For example, you can have a day job and then you can start your own business as a side hustle. You can be an Uber driver, Instacart. You can be a stalker. Just think of different ways that we can increase our income, our revenue, so that if one option dries out, you can rely on your other options that you already have set up. Making wise financial decisions is also imperative. It's important to really ask yourself, do I really need this item? Could I wait for this? Or do I just want it? Is it important for me to have this now? And again, I have to emphasize, save, save, save for everybody out there. Save, S-A-V-E, always save. Save for a rainy day, for an emergency. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. Those are my final thoughts on the power of Black money. Next slide. And the education will continue for the next 2 weeks. Maybe some of you are really looking forward to and waiting to meet our panelists and get to know other Black deaf-owned business owners. Maybe you want to learn from their experiences. Some of these business owners that we've invited have really thrived and during the pandemic. Their business has not slowed down. And some of them have actually been able to increase their revenue and make money. So next week, February 18, we'll see you at the same time, 1 to 2 p.m. And we have 3 panelists. We have Erica Olowi. She is the founder of Curry Bee. Some of you might be familiar with her thoughts in the ASL design, like the BLM, the finger smelling shirt, or the equality. Next one is Dejanay Deaf Flowers, Dejanay Ross. She makes different concoctions: elderberry, ginger, pineapple syrup, good holistic medicine that you can take every day. The last panelist we've invited is Zetta Stevens. She has a bakery based in Colorado where she has different pastries, desserts, cakes, many different things you can order. So we have the female business owners to come next week live to share their personal experiences. It'll be Q&A style. So if you're wondering about their business or thinking about getting ready to start your own business, come and meet with them. If you have questions ready to ask them, bring them on. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation, my event for today. Thank you again for all of you coming during your lunch hour to learn with us. And I hope today was really beneficial with the information that we shared and eye-opening to learn something new. Again, if you have any questions for Richie Bryant, you can use the Q&A box, or you can also email us directly at learns@csd.org, and we will make sure that Richie Bryant gets those questions. Also, please follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at CSD Learns, not .com, just at CSD Learns. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.